How to lose weight. This is part 3 of a series of videos on the website aboutcancer.com that discuss obesity, weight loss, and health. Part 1 is about who gets fat, why they get fat, and what are the health consequences. Part 2 discusses the best conventional advice on diet and nutrition, even though ineffective, and figured out what was missing from that advice. And Part 3, which is this video, discusses a different approach which is effective in helping people lose weight and keep it off. How did I evolve this approach? I reviewed all the literature, and particularly low-carb, high-protein diets, and concluded that insulin is the enemy. I considered the paleo diet and determined that evolutionary psychology and biology can be very helpful. I researched the fasting or partial fasting literature and determined that fasting is safe and healthy and, in fact, may be the ideal diet strategy. And then reviewed the topic of adult brain and neuroplasticity and determined that this organ can be upgraded or reprogrammed for the 21st century. In fact, the brain is the only organ that's clearly designed to be re-engineered or plastically remodeled during our lifetime. And so in conclusion, much of the blame for the current obesity epidemic is due to the excessive intake of sugar and the constant high insulin levels. Most people do understand what it is to eat healthy, but are betrayed by their hunger. And once you relearn how to respond to the sensation of hunger, the rest is quite easy. But you have to confront the baby and the caveman inside. So how would you help a modern man who keeps getting fatter? The current statistics say that 3/4 of adult men in the United States are overweight. Well, number one, you would reassure him that it's not his fault. His body's working against him. Obesity is genetic and evolutionary. Number two, you could tell him to try to change the environment, either ban or avoid high-density foods, hope they invent a zero-calorie cheeseburger, that sort of thing. Or three, you could tell him to change himself, either his body through medication or surgery that might alter the absorption or metabolism of food, or exercise to increase lean muscle mass, or change his mind or brain, alter his desire for the wrong type of food, either through medication such as diet pills, or perhaps rewiring his brain through neuroplasticity exercises. Or four, assume that he cannot change himself and try to use willpower alone to alter eating patterns. In other words, go on a diet. It's obvious from the last 30 or 40 years, however, the diets don't work. And simply telling someone to go on a diet without teaching them how to control hunger is like sending them into a boxing ring without teaching them how to duck. It just doesn't work. So, how do you help a modern man who keeps getting fatter? The key points would be remind him it's not his fault. Blame or stress doesn't help. 2, train him how to avoid high-density foods, identify nutrition foods and foods that have a very poor nutritional value. 3, definitely increase lean muscle mass through doing exercises or resistance training. And perhaps more importantly, teach him how to rewire his brain. So why do we eat? We eat because we're hungry. We eat out of habit. We eat out of concern that it's not healthy to skip meals. We've been told that you have to eat regular meals. We eat when we're sad, emotional eating, comfort food. We eat when we're happy, hedonic food, just to celebrate with feast rituals, romantic meals. Or we eat because we're addicted to food. And there clearly are now food addictions. The food industry has become expert at putting the right amount of sugar, fat, and salt into foods to increase their addiction potential. And all these foods are listed here and are the usual suspects. So the solution to obesity is 1, to decide, is it important to lose unwanted fat? Number 2, make a conscious decision, at least temporarily, to stop eating for non-nutritive reasons. Number 3, if you're addicted to food or certain foods, absolutely avoid them. But number 4, the hard part is, what do I do when I get hungry? And so we'll go back again to the baby. If you can toilet train a 2-year-old or 3-year-old child, you should be able to train an adult to deal with hunger. And some would raise concerns about, is it harmful to try to alter our response to basic instincts or evolutionary responses? Well, Darwinian forces or adaptive evolutionary responses were not always ideal. Sickle cell trait may have been an attempt to deal with diseases like malaria. Nausea during pregnancy may have been useful to avoid mothers in the first trimester eating toxic foods, but it's not particularly helpful. Xenophobia may have kept cavemen safe from other cavemen, but may lead to racism today. Fear of the sight of blood may have been helpful, so the cavemen would realize something serious is going on. But obviously a surgeon is able to desensitize himself. They're well aware of the significance of bleeding, but they've desensitized their brain so they can work efficiently without blood, around blood, without any emotional response. So we do this all the time. We rewire our brain. How about these foods? Can you desensitize yourself so that you don't respond emotionally or physically to this kind of food? Can we use the same tools against obesity that we used against cigarette smoking? Well, education, yes, we can educate people about bad food, and food labeling is certainly a right move in that direction. Can we tax bad food? Maybe, but there's a lot of political resistance to that. Can we restrict access to bad food? Well, maybe in school lunches, but efforts like New York City to ban food hasn't been effective. Can we ban advertising on food the way we did with cigarettes? And the answer there is probably no. And again, the efforts in New York City by Bloomberg to ban soda drinks was a failure. He was ridiculed and the courts eventually threw that out. So if you can't change the environment, can you change yourself? So we'll go back to, how does a baby respond? When a baby has urine in the bladder, he reflexively empties it. And when a baby has hunger, he screams bloody murder. Both of these are good. You don't want a bladder to rupture in a baby, and babies can quickly die of hunger or dehydration. And the baby needs to quickly get the attention of the mother. But how should an adult respond? Well, with a bladder, you're born with a sphincter, so you can manually control the bladder and empty it when it's most effective. And certainly you have mechanisms to control how you respond to hunger. How about the caveman? What's his relationship with food? Well, again, there was no refrigerators in his day. There were no doggy bags. The quickest way to store food safely was to use insulin and convert it into fat and store it on his body. There were no comfortable chairs in the Pleistocene era, and so he had to store the fat in areas that would provide cushion when he sits down. The response to hunger for a caveman was, feed me now or I will start tapping into your backup food supply, which is fat storage. And in an era where food was hard to come by, this was actually good advice. Time to start looking for more food. When is it critical to know you're now on backup fuel source? Well, perhaps Charles Lindbergh needed to know that. When there was oil crises in the 70s, if we saw an open gas station without a line, most of us would hurry over and get some gas. But in today's world where gas is plentiful, no one feels seduced by a gas station. And we very calmly put fuel in our car only when we think we need fuel. We should do the same with our bodies and simply say, I'll put fuel in my body only if and when I think I need fuel, not because I've been seduced by a chocolate cake. So this is a foolish threat, hunger. If you don't feed me, I will turn your body fat into fuel. And we can ignore this. So how do you rewire your brain to deal with hunger? And there's a mantra, 4-step mantra that you tell yourself. When you get hungry, number 1, you stay calm and acknowledge you got the message and your plan is working and you're right on schedule. It's like hearing a ringing phone and someone saying, isn't anyone going to answer that phone? And you calmly say, no, I'll let the machine pick up. I know the phone's ringing. I'm not going to respond. Number 2, you compliment yourself when you feel hunger. You say, good boy, I must not be cheating on my diet or I wouldn't feel hunger. And you give yourself a little pat on the back. Number 3, you remind yourself if you simply choose to ignore the single signal about hunger, the hunger will fade away, and the punishment for not eating is to force your body to start utilizing fat for fuel. And this is all good. It's like the lights going out and hearing the generator come on and knowing your backup energy source is now working. And if you simply ignore hunger, you realize your body will now be switching over to fat as a fuel source. And then finally, step 4, remind yourself that this is not harmful and there are additional health benefits from fasting or not eating that go way beyond weight loss. So will this strategy work? Can you actually apply this? Well, it does work. I tried this last year. I needed to lose weight and in 6 months dropped 50 pounds. I lowered my BMI or body mass index from 31 to 23. I cured myself of hypertension, elevated glucose, triglycerides. And when people asked how difficult this was, it was quite easy. How much did it cost? It was totally free. Did it take a lot of time? No, it took no time at all. Was it complicated? No. There was no counting food groups. There was no juicing foods. There was no complicated calculations. Was it dangerous? No. There were no diet pills. There was no bariatric surgery. And did I help myself? Well, by lowering my BMI or body mass index from 31 down to 23. I lowered my mortality from 1.44 down to the lowest point on the scale, 1. In other words, I reduced my chance of dying by 31% simply by applying this way of eating. Now, is this an eating disorder? Can you create problems and turn people into Karen Carpenter by remanipulating the way they think about food or hunger or diet? And the answer is no. With an eating disorder, you have a distorted self-image. You look in a mirror and instead of a skinny person, see a fat person. With my strategy, you simply look at your BMI number and determine is that in a safe or an ideal range. You don't find food disgusting. You look at food and just rank it by its nutritional value. Birthday cake is just fine, but it has a very poor nutritional value. So you eat it only rarely and try to eat small amounts, just have a taste. Eating is not uncomfortable. Eating is still just fine and fun, but it's on your schedule. And the games we play with ourselves, can you demythologize food? Can you convince yourself that it's not a specific ritual or mythic experience? Food goes in one end and comes out the other. Is it any different than a bowel movement? Can you think of insulin as the enemy? Can you convince yourself that the sensation of hunger is a good thing? Can you convince yourself that fasting or skipping meals is safe and in fact a good thing? And can you keep your family and friends from sabotaging your new approach to food? And how difficult is this? Don't we commonly assign meaning to body symptoms or sensations? If you had a sense of muscle soreness, if this was a reminder of a good workout in the gym, you would consider this a good feeling and you would say, oh, I can still feel the burn. If it's a symptom of a recurrent muscle disorder, like dermatomyositis, this would be quite alarming, the exact same sensation. If a woman has a protruding abdomen and it's a reminder of a long-awaited pregnancy, it's a good feeling. She pats her stomach and says, healthy baby. If it's a symptom of recurrent ovarian cancer, then it's terrifying. So the exact symptom can be assigned different meanings. Can we change how we respond to body stimuli? Of course, we do this all the time. The first time you tasted beer, wine, or coffee, it probably tasted awful, but we consider it an adult beverage, and most of us persevered and now find it very tasty. The first time you tried cigarettes, you found that toxic. And some people persevered and were able to enjoy smoking, though there, clearly Mother Nature was correct and it was warning us that this is not a good thing. The first time you jumped into a swimming pool, you may have found it terrifying. But once you learned how to swim, you now find it quite exhilarating. So again, we commonly teach ourselves how to respond to body stimuli. We do this all the time. Why consider fasting as a diet strategy? Well, it's the quickest and easiest and cheapest way to lose weight. There's more evidence that it's not only safe, but has additional health benefits. increasing longevity, increasing hormesis, which basically is your body's healing response when you provide mild type stresses. Number 3, it's the best strategy when you're trying to avoid food. You're not constantly counting calories, looking at food groups or recipes all day long. You're simply ignoring food. And number 4, it's the best psychological strategy to gain mastery over hunger, to stand up to the terror and bully of hunger. How do you stand up to a bully? Well, you go up and punch him in the nose. How do you stand up to hunger? You simply say, I can wait all day long. I can wait hours, days, or even weeks before I decide to eat. You need to be able to comfortably say that. The hyperinsulin state, which is discussed in much more detail in the early videos, can clog up our entire metabolism. So how do you fix that? Well, what do you do when your computer starts acting crazy? You simply reboot. So what do you do when your metabolism is hopelessly bogged down with insulin and leptin resistance and dopamine clogging up the pleasure center of your brain? You simply go on a fast. You detoxify yourself in that manner. Why does intermittent fasting work? Well, it improves access to glycogen stores by increasing glucagon. It increases access to fat stores by reducing insulin and LPL. It increases access to ketones, which are products of fat metabolism and are very good for the brain. And by regular fasting, your body gets efficient at switching back and forth between these energy sources, like lubricating the gears on a 10-speed bike. I have multiple references and videos on the website that discuss the safety, efficacy, and values in fasting. If you only have time to read one, then at least watch the videos by Mark Mattson, who's the chief at the NIH. And he points out that fasting has a long history that goes back thousands of years, and the advice has been consistent that this is a very good thing to do. The biochemistry of fasting all throughout the body shows multiple areas of benefit. The other thing that comes up is haven't we been told that you need to eat regular meals? You need to not skip breakfast, otherwise your metabolism will slow down. You'll have catabolic muscle effect and deplete protein. Is any of that true? And the answer is no, that's not true. A recent article in the New York Times made reference to a study from the Salk Institute about whether to eat regular meals throughout the day or just eat in small restricted time intervals. As the first panel shows, the obese mouse who was given a certain amount of food, if he ate it regularly throughout the day, he got even fatter. But if they restricted the time he could eat to a 9 to 12 hour window, the obese mouse became fit. If you take a skinny mouse and give him a lot of food and let him eat it throughout the day, the middle panel, you can make them obese. But if you time restrict it, they will stay lean and fit. And if you take a lean mouse and give him a lot of food, time restrict it at least during the week and let him eat whatever he wants on weekends, they can stay fit. So there's more evidence that you don't have to eat frequently throughout the day. You don't have to eat breakfast. It's quite reasonable and healthy to skip multiple meals. And again, the reference material for all this is on the website. The brain traditionally was divided, at least since the 60s, into 3 areas: a primitive reptilian brain, a mammalian or limbic system emotional brain, and then the neocortex, the thinking part of the brain. And in essence, what I'm proposing is in your more primitive brain, retrain it so you no longer respond instinctively to the sight or smell of food or hunger. And in the thinking part of the brain, you deliberately have decided to eat selectively, eat less frequently, and in small quantities. You need to say this mantra: insulin is bad, hunger is good. You need to memorize the 4 steps of this mantra and constantly repeat that. And you need to remember that you don't have to convince the whole world that this strategy makes sense. Only one person, the person holding the fork. And again, all 3 videos and all the reference material can be found on the website aboutcancer.com.